In 1919, a gruesome double murder is discovered in the railroad town of Cly in York County, Pennsylvania. The resulting investigation will lead to a manhunt through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, a suicide by a postal clerk, and the death of a Pennsylvania state trooper. One state police investigator would find himself under attack by backcountry Kentucky wildmen. Cly, Pennsylvania started out as a stagecoach hub on the York and Harrisburg stagecoach line. In the 1830s, a railroad was built over this same stagecoach route, and it still operates through what is left of the town today.
But we do mean to hold our ideals safe from foreign...
On May 12, 1919, Pennsylvania Railroad track foreman Jacob C. Lauer noticed that railroad employee Robert Hicks did not show up for work. The next day, May 13th, Lauer noticed that neither Hicks or the two men that lived with him, Gabriel Paracchia and James Critchlow, showed up for work. Hicks, Paracchia, and Critchlow lived together in a railroad shack in Cly. Shortly before noon, Lauer decided to go to the shack to see why the men were not at work. The screen door on one side of the shack was hooked from the inside. The door on the other side was secure with a padlock. Lauer looked through the windows and saw a man lying on a cot. He called his son Robert Lauer, and the two men forced their way into the shack. They were horrified to find the dead body of Paracchia covered with several coats and the unconscious form of Critchlow lying nearby in a pool of blood. Railroad detectives and District Attorney Rothschild were notified and quickly arrived on scene. Critchlow was taken to the York Hospital but was pronounced dead the next day. Hicks, as he was known, disappeared. Various articles found in the room were identified by Lauer. One of these was a large iron bolt which was used by the killer to commit the deed. Investigators determined that the motive was robbery, since trunks belonging to the victims had been broken open and the victims' pockets had been turned inside out. A telegraph operator in a tower advised that a man matching the description of Hicks was last seen boarding a train to York and Baltimore at approximately 5:15 a.m. Dr. Sylvia Roberts performed an autopsy and determined that Paracchia was in good condition except for the ugly wound inflicted on the right side of his face and head. Dr. Roberts advised that the right side of the face and skull were crushed in by a blunt instrument after repeated blows, and he was probably dead 12 to 14 hours when the body was found. So I checked out the photos listed on the on NACHIP, Northeastern York County History and Preservation page, and it shows two of the structures from that railroad that was there, including one of the shacks and one of the observation switching towers. Now, I can't say for sure that that shack is the actual shack that the murders happened in at this point, but going back to 1950s aerial photographs, you can see that those two structures are still the only two buildings that were there. That's 30 years after the murder. So whether there was other shacks hidden along there that's not shown in the 1950s photo, I don't know, but it looks like those two buildings and that shack might be the shack where the murders occurred. It's the old road back to where the railroad shacks would have been and the factory that was down here. But this house right here behind me, once we get up here, we can use the back end of this house to match up the old photos from the Historical Society. So it looks like there is some type of utility set up in a location where the shack and the train tower station would have been located. So newspapers at the time indicated that within 3 days of the discovery of the body, investigators would have realized that Mr. Hicks was actually Curtis S. Seipel. A description of him was then sent all over the country, particularly Cincinnati, Ohio, since they learned that his mother actually lived there. After retracing his steps, it turns out he came to Harrisburg originally to join the Army. This was just at the close of World War I.
The May 16th newspaper indicates that authorities arrested a guy in Marietta. He was working at Bill Meyer Quarries and matched the description of Seipel. But they brought him over here and showed him to railroad foreman Lauer, and he confirmed that it was not Seipel. But there were several reports around this time all over the area. Tips were coming in. One person stated that they saw him walking through Yoakumtown, which isn't too far from here. Well, on August 19th, 1919, an arrest warrant was issued for Seipel, but they had to find him. So investigators then went to Ohio to talk to his mother. They learned that he was there briefly, got a change of clothes, and left again. They only told the mother that he was under investigation for fraud. So they ended up giving a wanted poster to the post office there. But the clerk of the post office, a 30-year veteran of the post office, Adolph Ziegler, took that posting and actually gave it to Seipel's mother. Seipel's mother then tipped him off that he was under investigation for murder.
Ziegler was discharged from the post office, but he then took his life by asphyxiation with illumination gas.
Investigators then learned that Seipel might be headed to a secluded area of Kentucky. So they traveled to Kentucky several times, but were never able to make contact with him. But this here is the location where that tower and that shack would have been located. There was a factory down here a little bit further where you can actually see remnants of some of the structures that were here. Well, yeah, not much of Clyde left. There's a couple houses left here and a bar right around the corner up here, but that's about it.
The October 31st, 1919 York Dispatch features an article indicating that the reward for Seipel's arrest is not enough, and that the detective was using his own funds to follow the trail of Seipel through Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. The article indicates that the detective only stays on the trail because he considers it his duty.
After some time, it appeared that Seipel was not going to be brought to justice for this murder. So in December of 1920, District Attorney Rothschild contacted Major Adams of the Pennsylvania State Police and advised him of this case. Adams agreed to take up the investigation, but he insisted that the county pay for anything above the actual salaries of the investigators. Trooper Chauncey Snyder was then put in charge of this investigation.
Snyder's investigation determined that Seipel was born in High Bridge, Kentucky. Snyder then went to Bergen, Kentucky, but found it difficult to get information from the mountain men there. He eventually discovered where Seipel's father lived, and that Seipel was using the name John Lucas. Snyder then entered an old tobacco shed in a field about 300 feet from the father's house, where he discovered that Seipel would stay when he visited his father. Inside the shed, Snyder found an old brown bloody suitcase that had been taken from the shack in Clyde. Snyder learned that Seipel had left on a train for Junction City, Kentucky, where he would hide in the mountainous region of Knox and Bell counties. But on March 28, 1921, Snyder became ill and was forced to abandon the chase. He was taken to the Cincinnati hospital where he learned that he was suffering from appendicitis. Snyder underwent surgery for the appendicitis, but he died at the hospital on April 1, 1921, 33 years old. Private Leo Grotowski was then assigned this case and began reviewing Snyder's reports. Grotowski began searching Kentucky and learned that Seipel, aka John Lucas, had filed a change of address on March 4, 1921. Grotowski learned that Seipel was seen in the area of the town of Lehman, Harlan County, Kentucky, and he was allegedly working there. On May 6, 1921, Grotowski traveled to Pineville, Kentucky and made contact with police officer W.R. Roberts, explaining the case to him. The next day, outfitted with overalls, jumpers, and fishing tackle, the two lawmen traveled by train to Lehman. As they exited the train, they were surrounded by about 20 mountain men asking what the nature of their business was. Roberts, knowing the local lingo, asked where the best fishing holes were, and the men pointed them out. Roberts noticed a man that he had once done a favor for, so he told him he was looking for Seipel for a forgery charge. The man took them where Seipel and others were working, but asked to let him get out of sight. Grotowski and Roberts approached the men, and once close enough, Grotowski pinned Seipel to the ground while Roberts covered him with his Colt 45 automatic pistol. Seipel was handcuffed and led down the mountain when he let out a strange call, and 6 or 7 mountain men came running from the woods carrying axes. Facing both ways and covering the men with their pistols, Grotowski and Roberts, with Seipel in between them, made it down the hill to the train with the mountain men following, threatening to attack. Grotowski and Roberts pulled Seipel onto the train and made it back to Bell County Jail, where he was held overnight. Seipel was transported back to Harrisburg, where he was booked at the State Police Department headquarters. Seipel was then committed to the York County Prison without bail. The expenses submitted to the county by the state police was $929.81. On October 24, 1921, Seipel was found guilty of murder in the first degree and was placed back in the York County Prison. He then began making plans to escape. Two females named Mabel Krause and Margaret Dietz were serving sentences in the jail after Seipel was found guilty. Dietz began communicating verbally and with written messages through an air shaft between their cells. After Dietz was released from prison, Seipel began communicating with Krause through the same air shaft. Krause would then lower the messages on a string through her windows down to Dietz outside. After a few of these letters were passed, Krause became alarmed and informed the sheriff of the content of the messages. The sheriff and district attorney then had Krause continue to pass the messages as detectives hid in a freight car observing Dietz receive her letters. In one of Seipel's letters, he asked Dietz to get him a cap and a number of hacksaws. In a letter he asked Dietz to mail to his mother, he requested $100. This letter was sent to his mother, but the return letter only contained $1. Dietz only returned one more time and apparently lost interest in Seipel's escape. Seipel remained in the York County Prison until October 28, 1922, when he was transferred to Rockview Penitentiary in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania. But just prior to being transferred to Rockview, Seipel made a confession, stating that around the time of the murders, he was not feeling well and he didn't go to work for 2 days. He stated that he walked around the country in the area of Cly instead. On the first day he was off, something prompted him or told him to kill the two men, get their money, and leave. He was homesick. He dismissed the thought from his mind on that day. On the following day, the same prompting or the same something came to him again and told him to kill the men, get their money, and leave. He fought the thing off, but after supper, the same prompting came again. He stated that he then had the thought, I am going to bed now, and if the devil wakes me up before 12 o'clock, I am going to do the job. When he woke up as near as he can tell, it was about 15 minutes of 12. He procured the iron bar which had been used in the shack to prop up a window. He took this bar and hit Critchlow first, and then hit the other man. In a letter dated October 23, 1922, Seipel's father wrote, Dear boy, I received your letter of the 19th and was glad to hear from you, but awfully sorry to hear such sorrowful news. I can hardly think of it, it hurts me so bad. I wish I could say something that would help you in your hour of trouble, but words seem so empty and futile. I am awfully glad that you are ready to meet God and know that your sins are forgiven. What a glorious thing. My father and mother and sisters and your brother Dewey will be there to meet you. And about myself, with God's will and mercy, I am going to undo the tangle of my life and get straight with God and man. And when I am done with this weary world, to meet you there. I haven't told the boys yet. Seems like I can't, but I will. They are at school today, and it's raining here too. Dad to Curtis. Bye-bye. On October 30th, 1922, at 7:17 a.m., Seipel was electrocuted at the Rockview State Penitentiary. 8 minutes later, he was pronounced dead.
So the Cly historical marker is right across the street from the village of Riverside. So as a side note, in the 1990s, Riverside began development and they discovered that this is actually Indian burial grounds. So they ended up moving the graves, but the houses remain on Indian burial grounds. But it definitely makes me wonder if it has anything to do with that something that Seipel was hearing in his head telling him to kill his co-workers.